After retirement, you actually don't need any friends at all. I know that sounds harsh, maybe even a little shocking, but sit with me for a moment and let an old man speak plainly. I've lived long enough to watch entire circles of people come and go, to see friendships bloom and fade like seasons, and to finally understand something that took me decades to accept. Peace doesn't come from how many people surround you. It comes from how lightly you carry your life. When I first retired, I thought something was wrong with me. The phone stopped ringing as often. Invitations became fewer. People I used to see every week slowly disappeared into their own routines. At first, I blamed myself. I wondered if I had done something wrong, if I had become less interesting, less valuable. But over time, I realized something deeper. Nothing was wrong. Life had simply changed, and I hadn't yet learned how to change with it. You see, when you're younger, your life is full of structures that hold relationships together. Work, responsibilities, social obligations. These things force interaction. You meet people because you have to. You maintain friendships because they're tied to your daily life. But retirement removes all that. It strips everything down to its core. And what remains? Well, that's the truth of your life. I began to notice that many of the friendships I had were built on convenience, not connection. We shared workplaces, routines, or mutual needs, but not necessarily the same values or the same direction in life. Once those shared structures disappeared, so did the relationships. At first, that realization felt like loss, but eventually, it felt like clarity. There is a kind of freedom that comes when you stop chasing people. I remember sitting alone one afternoon, no plans, no calls, just silence. Years ago, that silence would have made me uncomfortable. I would have rushed to fill it, call someone, go somewhere, distract myself. But that day, I didn't. I just sat there. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected. I felt calm. Not loneliness, not emptiness. Just a quiet kind of peace that didn't depend on anyone else being there. That's when I started to understand. Solitude is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Now don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying all friendships are bad or that you should push people away. What I am saying is this. You don't need them the way you once thought you did. You don't need to hold on to every relationship out of habit, out of guilt, or out of fear of being alone. Because holding on to the wrong connections can drain you more than being by yourself ever could. In my younger days, I spent a lot of energy maintaining friendships that didn't truly nourish me. Birthdays, gatherings, favors, obligations, it all added up. And I told myself that this was what life was supposed to be. But looking back now, I can see how much of that energy was misplaced. Not every relationship deserves your time, especially when your time becomes more limited. Retirement teaches you something very important. Your energy is precious. You begin to ask different questions, not who should I keep in touch with, but who actually brings me peace, not how many people do I know, but how do I feel after I spend time with them? And those questions change everything. There were people in my life who left me feeling tired every time we met. Conversations that went nowhere, complaints that never ended, expectations that quietly weighed on me. And I kept those relationships going simply because they had existed for a long time. But time alone is not a good reason to continue anything, not even a friendship. So little by little, I stopped forcing it. I didn't make dramatic exits. I didn't confront anyone or create conflict. I simply stepped back. I responded less, initiated less, allowed distance to grow naturally. And something interesting happened. Some people didn't notice at all. Others faded away just as quietly. And a very small number, they stayed. Not because I chased them, but because there was something real there to begin with. That's when I understood the difference between a true connection and a convenient one. Another thing retirement reveals is how much relationships are tied to status. When you're working, people see your title, your position, your influence. Whether they admit it or not, that shapes how they treat you. I experienced this firsthand. When I was still working, people would call for advice, invite me to events, ask for my opinion. After I retired, much of that disappeared. At first, it felt like rejection, but over time, I saw it for what it really was. Those connections were never about me as a person. They were about what I represented. And strangely enough, that realization didn't make me bitter. It made me free. Because once you stop being defined by what you do, you can finally discover who you are without all that noise. You no longer have to maintain an image. You no longer have to prove anything. You can simply exist as yourself without the constant pressure to perform. That's a rare kind of freedom, and it often comes disguised as loss. Of course, this shift isn't always comfortable. There are moments when you will feel the absence of people. Moments when you wonder if you should reach out, reconnect, rebuild what was lost. And sometimes, that's the right choice. But many times, if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize that what you miss is not the person. It's the familiarity, the routine, the feeling of being needed. And those are not the same thing. As the years passed, I began to focus less on maintaining a wide circle and more on protecting my inner peace. I became more selective, more intentional. I stopped saying yes out of obligation. I stopped showing up where I didn't feel valued. And slowly, my life became quieter, but also richer. Because when you remove the unnecessary, what remains becomes more meaningful. Family, for example, started to take on a different role in my life. Not in a way of dependency, but in a deeper, more grounded way. Conversations became more genuine. Time spent together felt more important. Not because there was more of it, but because I was more present for it. And even then, I learned not to expect too much. People have their own lives, their own struggles, their own priorities. If you expect others to fill every emotional space in your life, you will always feel disappointed. But if you learn to stand comfortably on your own, then whatever others give becomes a gift, not a necessity. That shift from needing to appreciating changes everything. I also stopped comparing my life to others. You hear stories all the time. Someone starting a business at 70, someone writing a book at 80, someone traveling the world endlessly. And while those stories are inspiring, they can also create a quiet pressure, a feeling that you should be doing more, achieving more, proving something even in your later years. But I'll tell you something honestly, most of that doesn't matter. What matters is whether you can wake up in the morning without a heavy heart, whether you can sit in your own company without feeling restless, whether your days, however simple, feel like they belong to you. For me, happiness didn't come from doing extraordinary things. It came from ordinary moments, morning walks, quiet meals, reading, thinking, sometimes doing nothing at all. And in those moments, I found something that no busy social life had ever given me. I found myself. And once you reach that point, you start to understand why you don't need as many people as you once thought. Not because people are unimportant, but because your sense of completeness no longer depends on them. You become enough for your own life. And from that place, everything else begins to fall into its proper place. You start to see your time differently. When you're younger, time feels endless, almost disposable. You give it away easily, long conversations you don't enjoy, gatherings you attend out of politeness, obligations you carry because you think you should. But as you grow older, time becomes more visible. You can almost feel it moving. And with that awareness comes a quiet shift in how you choose to spend your days. I became more careful, not in a fearful way, but in a respectful way. Respectful of my own limits, my own energy, my own peace. I stopped overextending myself, even for people I cared about. Not because I didn't love them, but because I finally understood that giving beyond your capacity doesn't create deeper connection. It creates quiet resentment. That's something many people don't talk about. There's this belief that being a good friend, a good parent, a good person means always being available, always saying yes, always putting others first. But if you carry that mindset into retirement, it will exhaust you. Because at this stage of life, you're not meant to keep proving your worth through sacrifice. You've already done that. You've already given your years, your effort, your strength. Now is the time to live with a different kind of wisdom. I remember a period when I felt pressure to help everyone, family members, old friends, even distant relatives, financially, emotionally, practically. It didn't matter. If someone needed something, I felt responsible. And for a while, it gave me a sense of purpose. But over time, I realized something important. When you give too much, too often, without boundaries, people stop seeing it as generosity. They start seeing it as expectation. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because then your peace becomes tied to other people's needs. Your decisions are no longer your own. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to lose the very freedom retirement was supposed to give you. So I learned to say no. Not harshly, not coldly, but clearly. I learned to pause before agreeing to something, to ask myself, is this something I truly want to do? Or is this something I feel pressured to do? And that simple question saved me from many situations that would have drained me. You see, protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. And the same applies to money, something many retirees quietly struggle with. After years of working and saving, it's natural to want to share what you have, to help your children, to support your family, to give back in whatever way you can. But if you're not careful, that generosity can become a burden. I've seen people give away more than they could afford, thinking it would bring them closer to their loved ones. But instead, it created dependency, tension, even regret, because once your resources begin to shrink, the stress that follows can overshadow everything else. That's why I always say, your financial stability is not just about money. It's about peace of mind. When you know you can take care of yourself, when you're not constantly worried about the future, there's a kind of calm that settles into your life. And from that calm, you can give more wisely, not out of guilt, not out of pressure, but out of genuine intention. Sometimes the best way to help others is not by solving their problems, but by allowing them to grow through them. That's a lesson I wish I had learned earlier. Now let me talk about something that many people feel but don't always admit. The question of purpose. After retirement, there's often this quiet discomfort, a feeling that something is missing. For decades, your days were structured, your role was clear, your identity was tied to what you did, and suddenly that structure is gone. So naturally you start looking for something to replace it. Some people try to recreate their old life, starting new projects, chasing new goals, trying to stay as busy as before. And there's nothing wrong with that if it truly brings you joy. But if you're doing it out of fear, fear of being idle, fear of being forgotten, fear of losing relevance, then it will never feel satisfying. Because purpose in this stage of life is not about proving anything. It's about aligning with what feels right for you now. For me, purpose became quieter. It wasn't about achievements or recognition anymore. It was about small, meaningful moments. Sharing a story with someone who needed to hear it. Sitting with a grandchild and listening, really listening. Taking a walk and allowing my thoughts to settle without rushing anywhere. These moments may seem simple, even insignificant, but they carry a depth that busy years often lack. You begin to realize that life doesn't need to be filled to be meaningful. It needs to be felt. And that brings me to something I consider one of the most important lessons of all: learning to age gracefully. Now, aging is something people often resist. They try to hold on to who they used to be, to the energy they once had, to the image they once carried. And I understand that. Change is not easy. Letting go is not easy. But there is a quiet beauty in accepting where you are. You don't have to move as fast as before. You don't have to keep up with anyone. You don't have to stay in the center of everything. In fact, stepping away from that need can be incredibly freeing. I stopped trying to be who I was decades ago. I stopped measuring myself against younger versions of myself or against other people. Instead, I started asking a simpler question: what feels right for me today? Some days, that meant being active, going out, engaging with others. Other days, it meant staying home, reading, reflecting, enjoying the quiet. And I gave myself permission to accept both without judgment. That's what aging gracefully really is: not giving up, but letting go of unnecessary pressure. You start to appreciate things you once overlooked: a slow morning, a familiar routine, a peaceful afternoon with nothing planned. These are not empty moments. They are full in a different way, and gratitude begins to grow. Not as something you force, but as something that naturally appears when you stop chasing what you don't have and start noticing what you do. I often sit and think about the years behind me, the mistakes, the successes, the people who came and went, the lessons that only time could teach. And instead of regret, I feel a kind of acceptance, because everything, in its own way, brought me here. And here is enough. So, when I say you don't need any friends at all after retirement, I'm not saying you should isolate yourself or push people away. I'm saying you don't need to depend on friendships to feel whole. You don't need to maintain relationships that no longer align with your life just to avoid being alone. Because being alone is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness comes from disconnection, from yourself, from your own life, from your own sense of meaning. But when you are at peace within, when you are comfortable in your own company, solitude becomes something entirely different. It becomes a space where you can breathe, reflect, and simply be. And from that place, any connection you choose to have becomes more genuine, more balanced, more meaningful. You're no longer seeking others to fill a void. You're sharing your life from a place of completeness. That is the real freedom of retirement. Not a life crowded with people, but a life aligned with your own values. Not constant activity, but intentional living. Not chasing validation, but resting in self-acceptance. And if you can reach that point, even for a moment, you'll understand something that took me a lifetime to learn, that peace was never out there in the world, waiting to be found in other people. It was always here, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to notice it. All right, I've said quite a bit today. If any part of this resonated with you, then I'm glad we had this time together. And if your experience has been different, that's all right too. We each walk this path in our own way. Thank you for sitting with me, for listening, for sharing this quiet moment. Take care of yourself, live gently, and I'll see you again next time.